Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The royal court had witnessed disagreements before, but nothing prepared those present for the moment Princess Charlotte became the center of a confrontation no one could ignore. One cutting intervention from Camilla changed the atmosphere instantly. William's expression hardened, Catherine froze beside her daughter, and conversations around the room died almost at once. What followed was not ordinary royal discomfort. It was a father deciding, publicly and without hesitation, that a boundary had been crossed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had expected the evening to remain controlled. The formal family reception included senior courtiers, relatives, and the Wales children, because a ceremonial presentation was scheduled. The royal court, in this story, means the senior royal family and officials gathered around the monarch for formal duties. Charlotte's presence was therefore deliberate and appropriate. She was standing exactly where she had been asked to stand. Camilla changed everything with one sentence. Turning toward Princess Charlotte, she accused the young royal of behaving as though her future position allowed her to ignore the authority of senior family members. The queen consort did not soften the criticism, and the words stopped nearby conversations. Charlotte looked toward Catherine, then lowered her eyes. Her mother moved closer and rested a protective hand on her shoulder, fighting to contain her anger. William heard every word. The prince stopped mid-conversation, turned, and crossed the distance between them without waiting. He told Camilla she would not speak to his daughter that way again. Charles stepped forward and tried to calm the exchange, but his son refused to soften his meaning. Charlotte was a child, he said, and whatever concerns existed among adults would not be placed on her shoulders. Anne watched Charles more carefully than anyone else. The Princess Royal noticed that the king did not look shocked by the subject itself. He looked alarmed that it had been raised publicly. That difference mattered. William saw it too, and his anger shifted into suspicion. Camilla's remark suddenly sounded less like an impulsive insult and more like the eruption of a private argument he had never been told existed. Catherine guided Charlotte away as William followed, but he stopped before leaving. He turned back toward Charles and made one thing clear. This conversation was not finished. Anne remained behind, watching Camilla as the room struggled to recover. No one in that room could pretend it was harmless. The insult had lasted only seconds, but the palace now had to confront why it had detonated so violently, and what Charlotte represented to every adult caught inside it. For William, the confrontation was never simply about royal etiquette. Charlotte was his daughter before she was a princess, and seeing her publicly diminished awakened something far more powerful than protocol. Yet around her stood adults carrying expectations shaped by succession, hierarchy, memory, and rivalry. Charlotte may have been the youngest person caught in the dispute, but she represented the future, and every adult in the room understood that future differently. Catherine understood why that future frightened people. Charlotte was growing old enough to notice duty, ceremony, and the expectations attached to her position, but her parents wanted those lessons introduced slowly. Succession, the order determining who may one day inherit the crown, gave the child importance she had never asked for. William and his wife believed responsibility should build confidence, not shame. Camilla saw the same situation differently. The queen consort had become increasingly sensitive to hierarchy, meaning the ranking of authority inside the royal family, and she believed younger royals must learn deference early. Charlotte sat quietly beside Catherine after the confrontation, still carrying the sting of what had happened. Then she asked the question her mother had feared. Had she embarrassed the family? Catherine answered immediately. No, she had done nothing wrong. But the Princess of Wales felt the words land painfully because they proved the criticism had already moved inside her daughter's mind. William entered moments later and saw the uncertainty on Charlotte's face. The prince crossed to her, knelt beside her chair, and lowered his voice. Adults, he told her, were responsible for controlling their own words. She was not responsible for someone else losing control. His anger was still there, but he kept it away from his daughter, refusing to let fury become another burden she had to carry. Catherine waited until Charlotte left with a trusted attendant before speaking again. She told William that Camilla had made two smaller remarks at earlier family gatherings, both questioning whether Charlotte was becoming too confident about her future role. He stared at his wife, shocked that this had happened before. She admitted she had stayed silent because she hoped the tension would fade and because she did not want to force him into another conflict with Charles. William felt the betrayal shift shape. His anger at Camilla remained, but now he saw how much pressure Catherine had quietly absorbed to keep peace around him. When he asked when the first exchange had happened, she named a royal rehearsal several weeks earlier. Then she added one detail that changed everything. Princess Anne had witnessed what followed that night. That rehearsal, barely remembered outside the family, was about to become the hidden point of no return. The explosion before the royal court did not begin that evening. Its real origin lay weeks earlier, behind closed doors, during what should have been an ordinary ceremonial rehearsal. No raised voices had echoed through the palace then. No one had stormed from the room. Yet one exchange involving Charlotte, Camilla, and Catherine quietly altered the balance between them, and Princess Anne saw enough to understand that the tension would not disappear on its own. Catherine had brought Charlotte to a rehearsal for a family ceremony, where the young princess was practicing where she would stand beside George. A ceremonial rehearsal is a practice session used to prepare royals for the timing and order of a formal event. Charlotte stepped forward before she was meant to, and Catherine gently called her back with a smile. George stayed beside his sister, and the moment should have ended there. Camilla did not let it end. After the practice, she approached Catherine and said, Charlotte needed to learn that confidence could easily become entitlement. The queen consort spoke as though a childish mistake carried some deeper warning. Catherine stiffened. She replied that her daughter was 9 years old and did not need adult motives assigned to an innocent step taken too early. Anne entered during the final seconds of the exchange and heard Camilla insist that someone had to make sure Charlotte understands her place. The Princess Royal stopped immediately. Catherine closed the rehearsal folder in her hands and answered with controlled force that her daughter understood exactly who she was. Camilla did not apologize. She held her ground, and Anne understood that this was no longer about choreography. Anne later took Camilla aside with no aides present and warned her privately that correcting ceremonial behavior was one thing, but turning a child into a symbol of adult frustration was another. Camilla rejected the warning. She insisted she had only spoken about discipline and respect, but Anne heard something harder beneath the defense, a growing fear that the younger generation was becoming too confident inside the family. Catherine made one choice that would later matter enormously. She decided not to tell William. Anne disagreed, but she respected that decision because Catherine believed silence might prevent a larger conflict with Charles. That meant William entered the royal court confrontation weeks later, without knowing Charlotte had already been discussed in the same troubling language. Anne finally knew silence had failed. After the public attack, she sent William a private message asking him to meet before confronting Charles. She had one detail from that rehearsal Catherine never knew, and once William heard it, his fury would no longer be aimed at Camilla alone. When William returned to face Camilla, there were no cameras, no audience beyond the family, and no ceremonial smiles left to preserve. Charles stood between two people whose anger had been building for very different reasons. William wanted accountability. Camilla wanted respect for her position. And when Charlotte's name entered the conversation again, the future king abandoned every instinct to smooth things over. This time, he would make the boundary unmistakable. Charles tried to contain the damage before another word could sharpen it. The king gathered William, Camilla, Catherine, and Anne in a smaller drawing room and urged everyone to lower the temperature. A drawing room is a private reception room used for family or formal conversation, away from a larger gathering. He warned that one terrible exchange could become a lasting family rupture if anger took control. Camilla refused to accept that she had attacked Charlotte. The queen consort argued that royal children would eventually be judged by different standards, and insisted she had been speaking about discipline, not cruelty. William listened until she mentioned responsibility again. Then he placed both hands on the back of a chair and answered slowly, "You will not correct my daughter by humiliating her in front of a room full of adults." When she tried to respond, he cut in. Charlotte's upbringing belonged to him and Catherine. Catherine broke the next silence herself. The Princess of Wales described the earlier rehearsal conversation and admitted she had kept it from William because she believed restraint might protect the family. Camilla looked genuinely startled that the exchange had finally been spoken aloud. William turned toward his wife, realizing the confrontation he thought had begun tonight had actually been building for weeks. Anne then confirmed Catherine's account through the private conversation she had personally witnessed after the rehearsal. The Princess Royal added one detail Catherine had never heard. Camilla had asked whether Charlotte was being given too much freedom because of William's future position. That sentence changed the room. William looked at Charles. His father did not answer immediately. William asked the question no one could now avoid. Had Camilla discussed Charlotte with him before tonight? Charles hesitated, then admitted she had raised concerns once. The monarch insisted he had dismissed them, and had never authorized anyone to confront the child. But William no longer heard reassurance. He heard omission. Camilla had triggered the confrontation, yet Charles's admission changed its direction completely. William's fury shifted from insult to betrayal. Because his father had known Charlotte was becoming the subject of adult palace conversations, and had said nothing until it exploded publicly. Silence from the king now carried consequences of its own. For Charles, the crisis suddenly became more dangerous than one family dispute. On one side stood his wife, demanding that her authority not be publicly dismantled. On the other stood his son, insisting that a child had been dragged into a struggle she never chose. Charles could protect peace only by making a decision, and every possible decision would tell the family whose boundaries mattered most. Charles understood why the choice reached beyond one argument. As king, he could set expectations for behavior inside the reigning household, meaning the senior family and staff working directly around the monarch. But he could not claim ownership over William and Catherine's children. Anne's position also mattered because her long service gave her unusual freedom to challenge both generations, without appearing to seek power for herself. William met his father alone, and stripped the issue down to one demand. The prince said he wanted no public punishment, no spectacle, and no revenge. He wanted a guarantee that George, Charlotte, and Louis would never become instruments in adult disputes. Charles listened in silence, because the request was not extreme. It was painfully reasonable, and that made refusing it almost impossible. Charles later faced Camilla without anyone else present. The king heard her say William had humiliated her before the court, and weakened her authority in front of the family. He did not dismiss her hurt, but he drew a brutal comparison. Whatever embarrassment she had suffered as an adult, he said, could not be measured against Charlotte being corrected before a room full of people. Camilla went still when Charles removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the table. He told the queen consort that she would step back from any role involving the Wales children until trust had been rebuilt. She stared at him, waiting for softer language that never came. This was not advice. It was a boundary. Charles then instructed his household that every question involving the children must go directly through William and Catherine. The household, in this context, meant the staff and officials who organize royal duties and family arrangements. No public decree was needed. One internal instruction quietly redrew the line around the next generation and made clear who controlled their upbringing. Camilla accepted the decision in front of Charles, but her composure broke after he left. William learned soon afterward that his father had acted, yet relief did not arrive with the news. He had won the protection he demanded, but the cost was a deeper fracture inside the family. The boundary had been drawn. Now everyone would have to live with what it actually meant, and nobody could honestly pretend otherwise anymore. Royal crises often look loudest at the moment of confrontation, but their deepest damage appears afterward. In empty rooms, shortened conversations, and doors that suddenly remain closed. Charles had made his decision. William had protected Charlotte. Camilla had lost access to a role she believed belonged naturally to her. Yet none of them felt triumphant. The immediate battle was over, and the emotional cost was only beginning to settle. Charles knew the order would travel quickly through the household. Staff received discreet instructions that every arrangement involving George, Charlotte, or Louis had to be cleared with William and Catherine. The royal household, meaning the staff and officials who organized duties around the family, understood the significance immediately. The wording sounded procedural, but everyone knew it existed because trust had broken. Anne supported the decision without hesitation. The Princess Royal told Charles privately that family affection could not survive if seniority became an excuse to override parental authority. He did not argue. The king knew she was right, and her bluntness made the silence afterward feel even heavier. Camilla returned to her private sitting room and found the first consequence waiting. The Queen Consort opened a revised family briefing schedule and saw that a planned activity involving Charlotte had disappeared. She read the page twice, folded it carefully, and sat without speaking. For the first time, the boundary Charles had imposed was no longer theoretical. It had entered her daily life. Charles visited later and found her still shaken. Camilla asked whether he truly believed she had intended to hurt Charlotte. He answered carefully. Intention no longer mattered as much as impact. The words devastated her, because they removed the defense she had relied upon from the beginning. She could explain what she meant, but she could not erase what the child had felt. William faced a different wound the following morning. The prince noticed Charlotte was unusually quiet, and when he asked what was wrong, she wondered whether she had caused Charles and Camilla to argue. His anger vanished into guilt. He had fought to protect his daughter, yet she was now carrying responsibility for a conflict created entirely by adults. William finally understood what protection had to mean. Defending Charlotte was not enough if she still believed the family had fractured because of her. He needed to stop thinking like an heir managing a crisis and start thinking only like a father. So he requested a private conversation with Charles. No aides, no secretaries, no institutional buffer. After days of fighting over authority, William was finally ready to confront the fear beneath the anger. And this time, Charles would have nowhere to hide behind the crown. There were no courtiers to interpret the silence, and no advisors to soften the language. Charles and William sat opposite one another as father and son, stripped of the machinery that normally surrounded them. William had arrived prepared to defend Charlotte again. Instead, the conversation moved somewhere neither man expected, toward memory, regret, and the shared understanding of what happens when royal children are forced to carry adult conflicts. William spoke first, and the anger that had driven him for days finally gave way to something more vulnerable. The prince explained that courtiers, the trusted officials and attendants who serve around the royal family, could manage schedules and protocol, but they could never erase what children heard behind closed doors. He remembered growing up while adult disputes became burdens carried by people too young to control them. That memory, he admitted, had shaped everything about how he wanted George, Charlotte, and Louis protected. Charles listened without interrupting. The king understood that his son had built his parenting around a deliberate rejection of emotional distance. William wanted his children to learn duty, without believing love depended upon perfect behavior. Then his voice softened. Charlotte had asked whether she caused the argument. In that moment, he told his father, all the fury and confrontation suddenly felt hollow. He had defended her publicly, and still somehow allowed her to feel responsible. William looked directly at Charles, and admitted the thought frightened him. The future king never wanted his daughter believing family affection could disappear because she made a mistake, stood in the wrong place, or disappointed an adult. He wanted Charlotte to understand that childhood came before royal expectation. Charles absorbed those words slowly, because they reached beyond Camilla and touched wounds neither man normally discussed. Charles finally apologized. The monarch made clear he could not apologize for Camilla's words on her behalf, but he could answer for his own silence. He admitted during their private conversation that he had known concerns existed and failed to warn William because he hoped avoiding confrontation would make the problem disappear. Instead, he said, Ichbold allowed the conflict to grow somewhere else. William then asked what would happen between Charles and Camilla. His father refused to turn marriage into palace discipline, but he said trust could return only through acknowledgement rather than defensiveness. Then came the unexpected revelation. Charles had already asked Camilla to apologize directly to Charlotte when William and Catherine believed their daughter was ready, with no expectation that the child forgive, answer, or comfort anyone. William agreed. For the first time, father and son had reached the same emotional ground. But before that apology could happen, their private crisis escaped the palace. What began inside one royal room was about to become public property, and one image would reduce days of pain to a single unforgettable moment. By morning, the argument was no longer confined to palace corridors. The public did not know every private conversation, but one visible consequence told them enough. William had drawn closer around his family. Newspapers debated authority, broadcasters dissected the generational divide, and crowds outside royal residences began discussing something deeper than scandal. The story had become a test of what people believed modern monarchy should protect first: hierarchy, or the emotional safety of a child. Catherine felt the cost immediately. The Princess of Wales hated seeing Charlotte discussed by strangers, even when those strangers believed they were defending her. Buckingham Palace issued a restrained statement, saying the Wales children remained under the care and direction of their parents, and that private family matters would stay private. The palace statement, a formal message released on behalf of the royal household, confirmed the new boundary without describing the confrontation itself. William read the coverage with mixed emotions. The prince refused to regret stepping in, but he understood Catherine's fear that defending Charlotte had also made her the center of attention they wanted to avoid. Broadcasters framed the dispute as a generational clash, describing an older idea of royal hierarchy colliding with parents who believed childhood should never become an arena for institutional discipline. That framing mattered because it shifted the argument away from personalities and toward principle. A single newspaper front page captured the mood. A fictional morning edition carried a photograph of William leaving a royal engagement with Charlotte beside him, his hand resting protectively behind her shoulder. Across the page ran 3 words: a father's line. Outside Buckingham Palace, visitors gathered around copies displayed at a nearby kiosk. Some argued about Camilla. Others barely mentioned her. They kept returning to the same question: how much royal pressure should any child be expected to carry? Catherine noticed the change before anyone said it aloud. The debate was no longer simply Camilla against William. It had become a wider argument about whether George, Charlotte, and Louis should be protected from adult rivalries until they were old enough to understand them. William saw the same shift, and for the first time the public reaction did not feel entirely invasive. It echoed the principle he had been fighting to establish inside the family. Camilla could not ignore that message. The queen consort now faced a choice more personal than any palace instruction: protect her pride, or repair the harm caused to Charlotte. William and Catherine could not make that choice for her. The world had delivered its interpretation, but the story could end only in private, where one apology, one parental decision, and one child's response would determine what the confrontation ultimately meant. The final reckoning did not arrive through punishment, exile, or another explosive argument. It arrived through something harder: accountability. William had proved he would confront anyone to protect his daughter. Charles had accepted that silence could become complicity. Catherine had stopped carrying the burden alone, and Camilla was left with the most difficult choice of all: to defend her authority or acknowledge that no royal rank gives an adult the right to place a child inside an adult struggle. William and Catherine waited several days before deciding Charlotte was ready for a brief private meeting. The prince and his wife stayed close enough to protect her, while making one condition unmistakable: their daughter owed nobody forgiveness, conversation, or emotional reassurance. Charles deliberately stayed away. The king understood that his presence could turn an apology into another exercise of authority, and this moment needed to belong to the people who had actually been hurt. Camilla faced Charlotte without excuses. The queen consort told her directly that the words spoken before the royal court had been unfair and should never have been directed at her. The royal court, meaning the senior family members and officials gathered around the monarch during formal duties, had been the place where the damage began. She did not defend her intentions. She did not invoke hierarchy. Charlotte listened quietly before answering with 4 simple words: "Thank you for saying that." Catherine waited until Charlotte had left before speaking. The Princess of Wales told Camilla that trust would return through behavior, not titles. She accepted the boundary without argument. William remained guarded beside his wife, but something important had changed. For the first time since the confrontation, anger no longer controlled him. He had protected his daughter without forcing her to carry the burden of repairing the adults around her. William later spoke privately with Charles and reduced the entire crisis to one lesson. The future king said the question had never truly been about who possessed greater authority. It had been about recognizing where authority must stop. Charles agreed. The monarch admitted that the next generation could not simply inherit every emotional pattern that had wounded the previous one. Camilla remained removed from decisions concerning George, Charlotte, and Louis. That distance was not revenge. It was clarification. William and Catherine alone would decide how their children were raised, corrected, and prepared for royal life. The confrontation had transformed the family, because Charlotte was no longer being treated as a symbol in an adult hierarchy. And that was where the conflict truly ended. William's eruption mattered not because he defeated Camilla, but because he established a principle Charles finally supported, and she ultimately accepted. The crown may shape duty, but parenthood must protect childhood. Whatever pressures await Charlotte in the future, she will face them when she is ready, not when someone else's pride demands it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.